Okay, so back in the Atom IDE, we'll have a look at this sign-in process. So what we've got to do, it's going to have two components to it. It will have a sign-in using the Cognito JavaScript SDK. And once we've done that process, we will receive a JSON web token or JWT file from the Cognito identity service. We can use that Cognito token or that JWT token. We can pass that over to the AWS JavaScript SDK, and that can create federated credentials for us to access other AWS services such as Amazon S3 if we have defined a role that allows that to happen, which we will be doing. Now, so first of all, I'll just jump into that app final and copy the sign-in process first and put that in here. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So first thing we need to do is we need to collect that information, being the username and password, from the form on the user interface. Then we need to create a authentication details object and put that authentication data inside of it. Then we need to define our user pool, and that will be the pool data, which we do in a Cognito user pool object. And then we create user data, which will be a combination of the username and our user pool. And then what we also do is that we then create a Cognito user or a Cognito user object with that user data. Then once we've got all that done and we've got all that information in that Cognito user object, we can then call authenticate user and pass the authentication details to that. Now, one of three things will happen. So we will get a success and everything is fine, and we will receive our JSON web token, which we can then use to pass over to the JavaScript SDK to get our federated credentials. If that doesn't occur and we get an error, it doesn't always mean that everything went wrong. It might just be something minor that is not perfect, that hasn't got you the full success and given you your JWT token back. So if you get a 200 message back, that means that you have signed in, but there is some minor issue at stake there. So what you need to do is then, if you get that error message of 200, then you need to call userpool.get current user. Now, if that's null, it means that that person is not signed in. If it is, then you are signed into Cognito successfully, and that process has actually worked. So then what you need to do is to call the create credentials function that we're just about to make, and we need to pass that JSON web token over to the AWS JavaScript SDK to create those federated credentials. So let's now create this create credentials function. Okay, so now that we've got our JWT token from the Cognito ID service, we can now pass that over to the AWS JavaScript SDK. So we do that with AWS config.credentials. We create a new object and we'll pass that identity pool ID, and then we'll pass the login information, which will be a URL there, followed by our user pool ID. So what we need to do is go back into our user pool, not our ID pool, our user pool. Click on general settings and we'll get our pool ID up here. We just copy that over and we'll put that in there. And so then all we need to do is pass, with that user ID, pass our ID token, which we got, our JWT token, and that is enough information for AWS to create those federated credentials for us. But just because we've created this object here doesn't mean that we now have credentials available to use. We need to actually now refresh those credentials. So we do AWS config.credentials.refresh, and if everything is fine, then we'll get a message saying we have successfully logged in, or we are now signed in. And then we have credentials available for us that we can use to access other AWS services. So let's have a look at that. We'll just save that now, and we'll jump back into S3, and again we'll upload the new app.js. We'll make sure that we have public access on that object, upload that, and we'll make sure that we clear our browser cache. So clear all our browser data, and then we can go back to our website, we can refresh that and see what happens. So again, we're downloading the JavaScript SDK. Okay, so we will sign in first and see what happens. So we'll just we can use either our username or our email, but that will be fine. I'll just use the username now. I think that was the password I used, or hopefully it is. I'll just click on F12 to see what's happening. Okay, so I got an error message there saying incorrect username or password. So I just must have used the wrong password. So I'll just try it again, sign in. I'll try that. Okay, so that one worked. Okay, make sure you don't forget your password like I just did then. So we got there in the end, so you are now signed in. So signed in successfully and successfully logged in. So that all worked. So we are now signed into the Cognito service, and we are also signed in and have federated credentials to AWS config. So what we need to do now is to implement a sign out process. So let's see how that works. Okay, so now back in the Atom ID, let's have a look at this sign out function. So again, I'll just copy it over from the final. Okay, let's have a look and see what's going on here. So the first thing we need to do is that we need to check whether or not we actually have someone signed in on that device. Otherwise it doesn't make much point in doing a sign out. So first thing we can do is we can see whether there is a valid Cognito user that is signed in. If there is, that's fine. Otherwise we'll just send a message and safely get out of that function. Now we need to ask our user a question, because there are two types of sign out process. So we can sign out locally on that device and invalidate that token for that device, or we can sign out across all devices, and that will require the Cognito service to invalidate all tokens that have been issued for that user across all devices. So there's two options there. You may just want to just sign out locally if if you don't want to ask this question, or you may want to sign out globally for more security for the user or whatever. It's up to you, but I've just basically got the two options there for you, and you can make the decision yourself in your own applications. So if you decide to, or the user decides to sign out across all devices, then that will call the global sign out function of Cognito user. And if they decide to just sign out locally, then that is the sign out. Now there is a callback on the global sign out, and there will be an error if there's an error there, but we don't have that function with the normal sign out. There's no callback function on that sign out as such. But with global sign out, there will be an on success or on failure callback there. So we'll just save that, and we'll upload it again to Amazon S3. And again, make sure that we've got public permissions on that object, upload it, we'll clear our browser cache, and then we'll refresh our application. Okay, so we'll just sign in. Okay, so we're successfully signed in. So let's try the sign out method. Okay, do we want to also invalidate all user data on all? We might as well, because that seems to be the most complicated of the options. Okay, successfully signed out and invalidated all app records. Wonderful. So our sign out has been implemented quite good. Now, what if our user wants to change some of the details in their profile? So we'll look at the update profile application section now. Okay, back in the Atom IDE again, I'm just going to copy over the update profile function and put that in there, and let's have a look at it. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we have someone logged in. If not, then we safely exit the function. So if Cognito user is null, then we just send a message saying that there's actually no one signed in. Now then we actually have to get the attributes from a form, and that form will be similar to the registration form, but it'll only have the attributes on there of given name, family name, website, gender, birth date, and the custom one there for LinkedIn. Once we've got that, then we can add those to a Cognito user attribute one by one, and then what we do is we push them out to the attribute list. So we create a Cognito user attribute, and then we create an array of those by pushing those through one by one after we've created that Cognito user attribute. Okay, so once we've got that attribute list, then we can pass that over to update attributes, which is again a function of the Cognito JavaScript SDK. Once we've done that, we've got a callback, and it'll either give an error or not. And if it's successful, we just do an alert out there saying successfully updated. So we'll just save that, and we'll upload that and see how we go. And again, public permissions. And again, we clear our browser cache, and we refresh our application. Okay, we'll sign in. Okay, signed in. Okay, let's update that profile. So I'll leave that the same. Maybe change the website to whatever. That'll do. Yeah, whatever.com, that'll do. Okay, let's update that. Successfully updated. Wonderful. I'm just going to press F12 and see what happened on the console. So what we got was a cool result is success. That's all that's returned from that. So that's pretty good. Okay, next thing we need to do is to start using our credentials that we've got from Cognito to start using the Cognito Sync database. And what that will enable us to do is to store more information on our user for this application in the form of a key and value. So let's have a look at that. Okay, before we get into Cognito Sync, there's just one more function that we need to sort out with our sign up process, and that is if the user has forgotten their password, which happens quite often, we all know. So again, we'll just copy that over from the final and put that into here. Let's have a look at it. So what we've got is that the first thing that happens is that we need to create a user pool with that user pool data, and we also need to get from the user their username or email, and then we can put that in user data, being the username and the pool, which is the user pool ID. So then once we've got that information, we can then create another Cognito user object. Now we don't use Cognito user, well, there won't be a Cognito user as yet because this user has not signed in. So we need to create a Cognito user object using the JavaScript SDK, and then once that, then we can run the forgot password function of the Cognito user. So we will have an on success callback or an on failure callback, but optionally in there we can have a input verification code callback. So what that enables us to do is that not only do we start the process of forgot password where it sends out a verification code via email, we can also have it so that when this function occurs, that it actually asks for that code to be inputted in, and then we can input, or the user can input that code, and then they can put in their new password. If we don't do it that way, then we need to actually have a second button there for inputting the verification code. So this is a lot cleaner that we do it all in one function and with one call to the Cognito JavaScript SDK as well. So what we got there is that the input verification code will come back with a callback, and it will ask for that input verification code, and we will pass that over to the Cognito user confirm password. So if we didn't have that in here, in this part of the callback, we would have to have this as a separate button where you would say, confirm your new password or whatever, and we would call confirm password and pass that verification code in there, and along with our new password. And then again, we'll have an on success callback or a failure callback. So that's how that works. It's quite a bit involved in that, but it works quite well. So we'll save that and we'll upload that again to our bucket. And again, make sure that we've got public access to that. And again, we will delete our browser data, and then we can refresh our website. Okay, so we'll sign in. Actually, no, we won't sign in because we've forgotten our password. So let's click on the forgot password link. Enter your username or email. So I'm just going to use my username. That will be fine. Okay, so it's asking for that verification code. So what we need to do is go to our email and put that in there. So I'm just going to grab it from my email and put in a new password. That'll do. Okay, the new password has been confirmed. So that's done. Now we'll just jump back in and start doing our sync database function.